Where life takes a spin.
What you're doing. What's the organization that you're working with?
So our organization is called Tribe Tel Aviv, and we work with young Olim, people who have just moved to Israel, or people who have been here a few years, building community, connecting them to Israel, connecting them to Jewish life.
Right, so it's English speakers that we're going for, predominantly, I assume, from the USA.
No, from all over, actually, because a lot of people, whether they're from South America or Russia, their English is better than their Hebrew when they first arrive.
I guess that makes sense, yeah.
And they like connecting to other new expats, immigrants, Olim. So English is kind of, at least at first, the common denominator.
Yeah. So before I want to spend a lot of time about your what's it called again?
Tribe Tel Aviv.
Tribe Tel Aviv. I want to spend a lot more time on that. But before we get into that, why don't you give me your backstory? Like, where did you come from? How did you get into this?
So I grew up in New York.
Yeah.
New York City, Manhattan. Grew up in I guess, pretty typical Reform American background. Went to Sunday school. Wouldn't call it Hebrew school because we didn't learn Hebrew, but we learned about Jewish life and Judaism. And but we're not very observant, not practicing. So sense of Jewish identity, but not much about religion. And I remember asking questions about religion at a young age, 10, 11, 12, and not really getting answers. So I kind of dropped the questions.
What kind of answers were they giving you?
I remember asking, what happens after we die, right? Does God know what I'm thinking? So I'd sit there and say prayers about God, but we weren't talking about God or studying or understanding what that meant. And the answers were just, well, we don't really know about the afterlife. Now, I later learned that Judaism has a lot to say about it, and whether you agree or disagree with it, unfortunately, the teachers weren't really equipped to address this.
I've heard similar stories of people, at one of my family was at a wedding in the States, Reform, one of those denominations, and said it's now time for us to break the glass. Nobody knows why we do it, but we do it anyway. And my mother's like wincing. This is not.
So we studied Jewish history. We studied about the holidays. Got some of that background, but when I was confirmed at 15, 16, after that I just kind of dropped it.
Confirmed?
So in the classical Reform, there were no bar mitzvahs. When you kind of graduated from Sunday school at 15 or 16, you were confirmed.
Wow, that sounds kind of church-like.
That's what it was.
Wow. So no bar mitzvah, but you have a confirmation. Okay. It didn't involve like going into water, something like that. So I kind of dropped out of it because I didn't really believe in it. So why should I keep going to synagogue if I don't really believe in what the prayers are saying? And my Jewish life didn't get reawakened until the first time I was in Israel, which was about 4 or 5 years later, when I was in the middle of college, took off a year and traveled around the world. And Israel was the place to go after you ran out of money and go work on kibbutz. Right. Okay, so you can sort of be self-sustaining and discover yourself.
Yeah. So I spent 6 months in Europe, 3 months in Africa, and arrived in Israel. And I was in the country for half hour, trying to find the youth hostel or where to go, and met some guys who had a small outreach center near the bus station in Tel Aviv. And they invited me to stay with them and to take some classes and read some books, which I did, and got curious. So that summer I wound up in Jerusalem doing some studying. But what had happened was
over the course of that year of travel, also my Jewish identity had gotten kind of sparked in different places. I was in the middle of Africa and had met a anthropologist who was studying indigenous populations in the bush. And he wasn't Jewish, but his wife was. So he said, well, if you're in Khartoum in a few weeks, there's a Seder.
Okay.
So I had a Seder in Khartoum,
Seder
which
in
is,
Khartoum.
for all practical purposes, Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it probably would have been at that time. Yeah. Okay.
And it was the first Seder I'd had since my grandfather had passed away, or since he'd gotten older and not able to run the Seder, which probably had been about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so when I got to Israel and started...
Was it a Chabad sort of thing in Khartoum?
No, it was like a couple of guys who worked at the American consulate, a couple of Sephardic Jews who were there on business, a box of matzah. Nothing else was particularly kosher for Passover, but the matzah was there, and we probably read some of the Haggadah, and which was similar to the Seders that I'd had.
Right.
So that kind of gave me a touch point. And when I got to Tel Aviv and to Israel, I wasn't necessarily looking for this. It was, as I said, the place to go to work on kibbutz. But when I did go to kibbutz for 2 weeks, and after having done a little bit of studying in Tel Aviv, I went to kibbutz, and they had a bar mitzvah. So the bar mitzvah in the kibbutz was at night. The bar mitzvah ran an obstacle course. Ropes course, jumped through a fiery hoop, over some
Sounds like fun.
barriers, and kind of an initiation thing.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, where's the religious part of this? Me who's all of 1 week starting to investigate my Judaism. And they said, well, this is what we got. And
obstacle courses. Said, you don't get much more Jewish than obstacle courses, right?
And it was kibbutz anchored in Hashomer Tzair, kind of secular,
like
socialist.
Like a Habonim kibbutz?
Yeah.
Which one, Sorah?
It was Gadot. In the Hula Valley. And they said, well, I said, well, do you do anything? And they said, well, we do a Rosh Hashanah dinner. And I felt like, well, there should be more. Not that,
Yom Kippur dinner.
Once again, not that, I had so much going on in my life as of a week before. But so then I decided I would go to Jerusalem and do some studying, because I was intrigued by what I'd been exposed to, and wanted to kind of investigate more. So that led to a whole process of investigating.
So which yeshiva were you in?
I was in Eshet Torah for 2 months, so that summer. Then I went back to college for a semester and took a lot of Jewish studies courses and hung out in the Jewish community.
Now, what's a Jewish studies course like in college? Who runs the faculty?
They're Jewish studies professors, and I think one of the courses was on Jewish law, in fact, and it was very interesting. I took Hebrew, and it's really different topics in Jewish life, in Jewish history. This happened to be the history of Jewish law. So I never really studied Talmud, so it kind of gave me an introduction to Talmud, which I'd never had.
Right, which you didn't get at Aish yet, or they were still keeping you on the beginner?
2 months,
Yeah. Right.
So after a semester, I decided I want to go back and investigate this more. So I went back to Israel, took another break. I'd taken a year break, came back for half a year, took another break, and re-enrolled myself in the yeshiva.
Were your parents a part of this at all?
My mother was not happy about me, let alone dropping out of school again. And even more so, she had been a Holocaust refugee. And
where was she from?
Austria. And kind of had the outlook that, well, look what happens to you if you're too Jewish, don't be too Jewish. She never denied her Jewish identity, and she even felt some pride about in Israel and what Israel had accomplished. But religion was very anathema to her. So
did she come from a religious family?
A little traditional, not that religious. I mean, remember that when our grandfather would come to our house for the Seder, he would bring wine. And they always had a carton of Carmel wine in their bedroom in the corner, the tall Riesling green bottles. And I remember once asking my mother, why does Grandpa bring the wine? And she said, well, he likes Israeli wine. Now, I later understood that he wanted at least to have kosher wine for the Seder, even though the rest of the Seder wasn't kosher. But I didn't know what that was, and she wasn't really tuning me into that. And then I remember also, I would go over to my grandmother's house, and she would always dote over us and give us food and chicken soup, and I liked milk. And every single time I would get up, go to the refrigerator, take out the milk and drink a cup of milk. And looking back on it, I realized, well, she knew I liked milk. Why didn't she put it out? Because she wasn't going to put out the milk with the meat. But if I would go and take it, she wasn't going to tell me anything.
Right.
So there was a little bit of tradition there. Sometimes on Friday we'd go buy the challahs for them. So a little bit.
Yeah.
Not strong.
Okay.
So, but my mother, it was very difficult for her, wrapping her head around the idea that I was getting interested in religion. And, but I was determined to follow up on this. So,
yeah. So you went back to Aish?
I went back there for 6 months.
And then you started a Gemara.
And then I started studying some Talmud, and I was there for 6 months and still didn't know whether I believed in God, still didn't know whether I believed in Torah, and was kind of vacillating or unsure. Very interested, but didn't know where and I wasn't going to kind of start to immerse myself in this whole life if I didn't really believe that there was truth to
But
this.
you were prepared to invest 6 months in it.
Yes, yeah. It's because I'd found that I'd studied liberal arts because I was interested in these questions of what is morality, how do we make the world a better place, what is meaningful in life. And after 2 years of studying Greek philosophy and literature and anthropology, I wasn't really getting answers. And that's part of the reason I took that year off to begin with.
Right.
So I saw people here engaged in these questions in a very much more kind of practical way of how does this impact our life? How does this impact our behavior?
Right. So even if you weren't entirely convinced, you could see that that you're getting closer. Is that kind of the feeling?
Well, I felt engaged in these questions, and felt some of the discussion and how to be a good person, or that it starts with being a good person, not necessarily with okay, I'm going to change the entire world.
Right.
So a lot of it was resonating, but I wasn't going to kind of adopt this whole way of life if I didn't believe this was true. Some people, Shabbat's beautiful, family life, it's all nice, kind of, and just kind of like move into it.
Right.
But I didn't have that outlook. So after 6 months, I was still not sure. And then my grandmother passed away, who I was very close to. So here I had a dilemma because she and her 3 siblings all survived the Holocaust. And I was the only one who was engaging seriously Jewishly. No one else was going to say Kaddish for her. And I realized that either Kaddish is just a nice custom that you do to kind of remember the person, and I would do it when I had an opportunity, if I happened to be in synagogue, whatever, which was pretty often, but not all the time.
Right.
Or there is a soul and there is an afterlife, and Kaddish will somehow help her move to this next stage of dimension of reality. And it was my responsibility to say Kaddish every day. And this was no longer a theoretical question of, well, do I believe or not? And with no kind of, due date to decide. I had to decide like what
Are
will
you going
impact
to-
my actions, and maybe her.
But it's like, it's kind of a hedging your bets thing. It's like, there's no harm in saying the Kaddish, but it could do it could do a lot of good.
The Pascal's wager doesn't really go over either for me. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, I guess I could have taken that approach with her and with the Kaddish, but it didn't seem like the third option to me.
So what was your thinking then?
So that was part of it, was the compelling moment that I had to really kind of decide what I really thought about all of this. And then I also looked back on the last year, and particularly go back to Africa. And when I got to Israel, I'd gotten very sick in Africa. And so I went to kibbutz and partially to recover. And after 2 weeks, I was starting to feel better. And then I decided to make my way down to Jerusalem. And I don't even know if I would have gone to Jerusalem otherwise. And I didn't really know what the wall was. I thought the wall to me was like the cover of a Pink Floyd album. It's like a brick wall. Didn't know. I just knew there was a wall.
And you don't want to go like get there and say tear down the wall.
They weren't. That wasn't going on yet. So when I got to Jerusalem, I tracked down the school. I found them, and the guy who was there with me in Tel Aviv was there. In fact, said, "Hey, I'm back. See, I told you I was interested. I wanted to come." And a lot of people get sort of very interested quickly, and then they bolt because they realize if I keep studying, this is going to impact my life.
Yeah.
So I think they thought I was one of these, bolters.
Yeah, when things
taken
start
off.
getting uncomfortably close to into
Yeah.
making lifestyle decisions.
So, so I found him and, told him, see, I was serious about wanting to come study. And he said, that's great, but I'm sorry. There's no classes for the next 3 days. So I was really upset. Here I traveled all the way, left kibbutz, traveled all the way, come to study, and I've got to be kind of in holding pattern for 3 days.
Yeah.
So it turns out, why were there no classes for 3 days? Because I'd arrived at the yeshiva Erev Shavuot, the day before the holiday of the giving of the Torah.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean much to me then. But a year later, I realized what this meaning and import of Shavuot was. And I realized that if I traced my trajectory, I had a Seder in Egypt. And 50 days later, I arrived at the doors of the yeshiva to study Torah, Erev Shavuot, which paralleled the Jewish people's experience, right?
Yeah.
From leaving Egypt to Mount Sinai.
Wow.
And so when I
That's cool.
look back
Yeah.
over that, I said to myself, there's something else going on here. This is just too uncanny. Because there's other thing that had happened. I was in Paris, studying there for 4 months, and I was sitting in a cafe, what you do as a student in Paris. Right? And this guy, this Asian guy next to me, started talking, his Vietnamese student. And this was one of the Iran oil crises. And we were talking, found out I was Jewish. And he said, what would you do if America attacked Iran? And I said, I'm not going to go fight for the West to have their oil fix. And, standard kind of student answer. And he said, you American Jews, you don't realize you're from one of the oldest civilizations that has given the Western world its values and its foundation. And those people are your enemy and the enemies of Israel, and you should want to go and fight.
This is like
defeat them.
random non-Jew telling you
Random
this.
non-Jew. So when I look back at all these things, I was on a train in Egypt. And the train would just stop in the middle of the desert and people would get off and talk.
Yeah.
And someone asked me, what tribe are you from?
What tribe?
Now, I was going to say, well, I'm American and I have a U.S. passport. And then somehow I just bleated out, Jewish tribe.
Yeah.
Which I realized afterwards in the middle of Egypt might not have been the smartest thing to do.
What year was that? Before the peace treaty.
In the 80s.
The 80s. Okay, so
So it was probably the first time I'd identified myself as being Jewish. So these little things started to happen. So when I look back over the year, I realized this wasn't all random. And I felt like there was some larger destiny that was going on in my life, and which one could call hashgacha pratit, divine providence, God's hand, however you want to call it, but that there was a larger calling going on. And so that also impacted my decision to say Kaddish for her, and then to start putting on tefillin every day and move towards being fully observant. So that was kind of the turning point.
So, like, where would you say was, like, you said that you started out like learning and being interested but not being convinced, and then there was a tipping point at some point where you said, yeah, okay, I'm all in.
Well, it was when my grandmother passed away, as I said.
Yeah,
and
so
I had to kind of like...
So that's like, okay,
decide, am I going to do this or I'm not going to do it?
Right.
Yeah. And I didn't go all in 100% right away, but I moved towards, as I said, putting on tefillin. And my approach, there's different approaches, and now so how this is relevant for Tel Aviv is that part of what we do is try and connect people to Jewish life. And I feel like because I came from very little and kind of went through this path of getting engaged in Torah and learning, that I understand the outlook of people who are coming from much less background.
Right.
So, and there's different approaches to it. Sometimes you say, well, do what you can, do it when you can. Every mitzvah is another connection.
Right.
But I kind of took the approach because I'd been in yeshiva for 6 months, if I'm going to take on something, I'm going to make a full commitment to it and do it fully. So I didn't start tefillin until I felt I was ready to commit to it every day. So I felt like if I would do a day and then miss a day, I'd drive myself crazy. So that was kind of the approach I took.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Because that's also kind of how I took things on. It's like when I was ready, start, and that's it. It's from now on.
Commitment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there might have been days where I missed, but overall, it was a full commitment to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so having made this commitment, then you carried on studying in like a more mainstream yeshiva.
So I was there for a year and a half, and I felt like I wanted a perspective that gave me more understanding of Jewish history and more an understanding of kind of the backstory of how the Torah we live today came to be, which isn't the goal of yeshiva. So I wanted to study Jewish history, and my mother wanted me to finish college, and I felt like it was a good thing to do. So I transferred to Yeshiva University, and where you study Torah in the morning and then college in the afternoon. And once again, a lot of the college studying I did was Jewish studies courses as well. So
what was the rest of your degree?
History. Which is what I'd been studying before. But I was able to do most of it in Jewish history. And wound up doing actually a BA MA program in 2 years. So I got a master's in Jewish history, and then I came back to Israel, to yeshiva for 2 years, and then back to Yeshiva University for rabbinic ordination. So I wound up having 9 years of studying from when I started to when I finished smicha. Finished my rabbinic ordination.
I think history is such a valuable subject to actually. I remember Rav Banowitz, the previous Rav of our shul, he said he considers it a mitzvah min Torah to study history. Why? Zechor yom hasolam. You have to remember the days that came past, and it's such an important perspective to understand history, because if you just think that the world is the way what you've seen in your experience, then you're basically like the students on campuses in America right now, where you think nothing important happened before you were born, and everything's about the now, and you have no perspective of what happened 20 years before you, 50 years before you, 100 years before you, 1,000 years before you. It's like there's so much stuff going on which adds perspective to what's going on in the world today. And that said, that history can also kneecap you, I think. For example, just about every conflict in the world today is some form of, your grandparents did terrible things to my grandparents, so we're at war. And at some point you actually got to say, it's all very well having all that history, and we got to acknowledge that history, but we also at some point have to put history behind us if we're going to make progress. And I think honestly that's one of the things that makes the Jewish people so resilient and so adaptable and able to bounce back from whatever happened. Because I mean, can you imagine any nation going through a Holocaust and having a third of your number murdered, and then just picking up and saying, okay, that was terrible, but now let's pick up and carry on and build a state? It takes that kind of resilience to say, okay, history aside, we still got to look forward and make a future for ourselves. Anyway, I interject those thoughts over there. Okay,
so I wound up actually doing graduate school while I was in the rabbinic program, and wound up getting a graduate degree in continuing my Jewish history graduate school as well, and eventually got a doctorate in Jewish history. So that was always part of kind of my interest in learning. And
okay, so you finished university.
Yeah.
And did you get your smicha, your rabbinate?
I got a smicha, and then I started...
at YU you got your smicha?
Yeah. And my first position was in a large synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Oh, so you actually had a rabbinic position?
Yeah.
Wow.
But the rabbinic positions I had all had a strong outreach component. So I actually started a whole beginners program in the synagogue. So we ran a Shabbat morning explanatory service, did classes more geared for beginners, and kind of figured it out along the way. There was a lot less going on than there is today in terms of outreach. So
yeah,
we engaged with different Jewish organizations around programs, and we're having an impact. Yeah. Some of the students from back then are living in Jerusalem now. So
that's your measure of success.
Part of it.
It's one measure of success, I guess.
Yeah.
So you were you held a position as rabbi in America for how long?
I did 8 or 9 years in different synagogues with an outreach component, and then I had the opportunity to start a outreach program on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. With Manhattan Jewish Experience. Rabbi Mark Wilds had started the organization a couple of years before. I was teaching there. And then there was a benefactor who wanted to kind of expand, grow a program on the East Side. So, who I was connected to. So I came to my wife one day and said, how'd you like to move into the city? We were living in Queens, in a house, and, had a more kind of lifestyle she was used to, having grown up in the suburbs. I grew up in the city. Right. And she was open to it. And we said, we'll give it a year trial. And we moved in with half the first year's budget. And 17 years later is when we made Aliyah.
Sure. So, and so that takes us to what year did you make Aliyah?
2018.
2018. Yeah. And you came straight to Beit Shemesh?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so now tell us about Tribe TLV.
So we mentioned it's a community of young Olim from all over the world. And there's really a two-tier mission. One is to simply help them with their Aliyah, because people come here, and some people come because our community is mostly people who didn't go to day school, not Torah observant. And they come here for different reasons. Some of them do a birthright, do a Masah program, get inspired, fall in love with Israel.
Right.
Some of them have a parent who is from Israel originally, and they have grandparents here, some family here. Some feel like, hey, Tel Aviv is a great city. If I'm Jewish, I can get a work visa, or I can, become a citizen. And I'm just going to kind of jump over to
Why do they choose Tel Aviv? It's the most expensive city in the world.
Well, if you think about it, how many world-class cities are there right on the ocean? Not that many. Rio, Barcelona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great city.
So,
and it's got a very young population, and it's a city, but it's not too big or too overwhelming.
So there's lots of great things about Tel Aviv.
So, like, what are the kind of issues that the people that you meet working with face, as Olim in Israel?
Obviously, there's cultural difference.
Yeah.
Just lifestyle, how things work here, and some people, you hear them. In the States, things work this way, or by the way,
paper's too hard.
Way back there, not everything works perfectly either. But when we made Aliyah, we came saying, you know what? It's a different country, no expectations. We don't expect it to be this or what it was. And I think if you come with an open mind, every place has its advantages and disadvantages, and they might be different than the ones you had. But if you really kind of are open to it, you'll see that every place has its trade-offs,
right.
And the upside here is very great. So that leads to the next question is, that what is anchoring people here? Because first of all, the livelihood, parnassah, is certainly a challenge. You're going to be earning a fraction of what you did back if you're from the States, certainly.
Are these people who are like fresh out of college, or is it
usually a few years out of college, mid-30s to mid-20s to mid-30s usually.
Right, so they've got a bit of work experience, and they're employable. And,
But often they have to make a shift. They're not going to be working exactly, in the same area that you would necessarily work in the States. And so in some ways it's starting over. There's the cultural differences of adjusting to, the pace of Israel and the way things work here, which are sometimes much less formal and much less. So
is there like an Anglo sort of community that's sort of coagulated, like we have in Ramat Beit Shemesh, where all the Anglos have found
not geographically, but there's definitely, and I wouldn't even say it's Anglo, I would say once again it's Olim. And there's definitely a singles Olim community in Tel Aviv.
So is Tribe Tel Aviv targeted specifically at singles?
There are some couples who come, but practically most of the people come are singles.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're looking to find
community, to find peers, and we try and help them network as well. Whether it's to find an apartment at the beginning, even a job, more informal.
So I mean, are you advertising yourself as a religious organization?
Not necessarily, no. And not everything we do. Every Wednesday we have a speaker come, and they'll talk about different aspects of Israel, whether it's politics, cultural, business. So sometimes that'll have some religious content, but no, it's not.
Right.
The first tier is
just helping you to settle down.
Helping them to be connected, finding community, connecting to different aspects of Israel as well, feeling connected to it.
Yeah. And community is such a critical thing.
So Tribe Tel Aviv is also part of Am Yisrael Foundation. Am Yisrael Foundation runs like Tel Aviv Arts Council. So they'll do cultural things like discounted tickets to the Philharmonic and things like this. So it's really connecting them to all different aspects of Israel and making them feel connected. And not everyone is looking to be more involved in Jewish life. So, but if they're not, if they don't feel have a community and have a group of friends and feel connected, then when things start getting more challenging, which is often after, a year or two, the honeymoon starts to rub off a little, and the challenges are there, and the comparisons are, well, like, what could I be earning back home? So the more they're connected and they more feel part of it, the more likely they are to stay.
Right, and you're anchored with friends. And,
and that's the first level of Mitzvah Yeshuva Yisrael.
Right.
Then on top of that, there are a lot of touch points of Jewish life. We're doing a Shabbat dinner this Friday night, communal Shabbat dinners, Torah classes, holiday events. So I do a lot of one-on-one learning with people, putting up a mezuzah if they need one.
Right.
So that's kind of that's the second tier of the mission, if you will. Yeah.
Right. So now you touched on politics, and that's one of the very interesting points of here, because it's like Tel Aviv is like a different world from Beit Shemesh, where we live, in terms of political outlook. It's they vote very differently, and we've had recently all these demonstrations, first against the judicial reforms, then against the whatever they're doing for negotiations for the hostages, and what's behind all of the Tel Aviv politics, and how does it rub off on the people that you're meeting with? What are they expressing? What are their concerns?
So I think we get the whole range, especially Olim isn't necessarily a self-selecting group going to Tel Aviv because of the politics.
Okay.
So we are not political.
Yeah.
So we'll have speakers from both ends of the spectrum and sometimes debating together. We had a one on judicial reform, someone from the right and someone from the left. And
was it civil?
The definition of civil will be very different in the States or in Israel.
I guess.
So for the Israel standards, yes.
although I mean, looking at the US election that just went by with, that wasn't very civil either.
That's true.
And
That's true.
Yeah. No, okay,
we're not there to influence their political outlook. We're there to give them exposure to all different outlooks.
Yeah.
And we'll have someone from, we had the deputy mayor come and speak about transportation in Tel Aviv, the future of Tel Aviv. And I had people come up to me, how could you have her speak? Someone from the left. And then we'll have someone from the right speak, and we'll get the same thing. And that's a good thing. So that shows that we're doing things the right way. And I personally,
equal opportunity offenders.
I personally myself will express views about, maybe the larger picture of the future of Israel and what our vision is, but I don't get involved in political issues. And if you're doing outreach, and you do, basically you'll turn off half of your population, because it's probably half or more to the left, half or more to the right. Most are somewhere in the middle, and a lot of them are still formulating their views of what do they think about the issues in Israel. So we don't.
Right, so you try. That's the danger zone. Here be dragons, and if you're, I understand. So you want to kind of stay out of those murky waters. Yeah. Right,
in terms of like giving my own outlook on it, or the organization representing any one outlook. Yeah.
What I'm going to try and take a little bit of a tangent over here, because one of the things that I'm interested to understand from my own perspective, because I don't actually get a lot of exposure to other political views. We're in a bit of a bubble over here, and aside from your work in your outreach work, I'm just curious to understand from the other perspective. Like, I've no doubt that the people who are demonstrating in Kaplan Square for a deal at any cost, or maybe I'm expressing it wrong. Maybe it's not that they're saying a deal at any cost. It's just the impression that I'm getting. And from my perspective, I find it difficult to understand. I mean, I can understand the pain that we've got. Nearly 100 people who are still in captivity, and we want to get them home. Whether unfortunately dead or it's a shame they should be alive. We want them home, and I cannot even begin to imagine the pain that the families are going through. On the other hand, the sort of perspective of deal at any cost is like, just in terms of game theory, just doesn't make sense to me. You're broadcasting weakness, which just means that Hamas is going to up their demands accordingly when they see that you're desperate. So I want to understand what is. You probably have a lot more discussion with people about this who are explaining this. Can you put forward a coherent argument as to why they're so set that we must make it?
I think there's a wide range of people who have a wide range of positions. I think the media kind of portrays it very one-dimensionally.
Yeah.
So, but I think it is more varied than kind of what they present. there's a small, very vocal group. So beyond that, I don't really get into the back and forth of what the issues are. So I'd rather, but I can tell you that we were in the center of this, of the public demonstrations. A year ago, Yom Kippur,
Right.
we were doing our Yom Kippur service, which starting COVID, we had done it outdoors
Yes.
for 2
So
years.
that was you. Ah.
And in 23, we decided COVID's over. There's no compelling reason to do it outdoors. But you know what? It was great because people would walk by and they'd join us, especially at the end of Yom Kippur. Hearing the shofar is a very big thing for Israelis. So we had our service at Kikar Bima all those years.
Right.
And all the families who were there with their kids playing, they would all come over at the end to hear the shofar.
Right.
And we decided to keep it outdoors. I did not know that at the same time there was a whole Supreme Court discussion of
Whether you
tefillah outdoors, whether you could have it, couldn't have it. Like every year, I applied to the Iriyah to get permission, and they were kind of vague about it. Well, the person who I'd contact with said, well, we didn't send a form of paper, but it should be fine. Don't worry about it. So, as far as I was concerned, I'd gotten the permission to do it. And it turned out that 3 days before, the Supreme Court had ruled that the Iriyah of Tel Aviv had a standing policy that one could not have separate prayer in a public setting in Tel Aviv with a mechitza. And they had the Supreme Court had upheld, they didn't rule one way or another on it, they just said that the city of Tel Aviv has the right to set their own policies. And that was it. And so you might have remembered,
in the COVID years, they just didn't enforce it.
Correct. And you might remember that, so Erev Yom Kippur had already started at Kikar Diesendorf, where an Israeli organization had a very big service, thousands of people the year before. And there was an altercation and it shut down. So we did Kol Nidre, things seemed okay. We started Arvit, and then the comments started. What are you doing here? And then someone came and pulled the mechitza away. And there's always kind of a random, boyfriend, girlfriend sitting on the other side of the mechitza, and we have separate seating, and we have a barrier to show the two sides, but we don't enforce it down to every last person. So at that point, when they started making comments, I said, well, now's no mechitza, vein tefillah nifchedet, it's not absolutely separate, but they didn't care. And they just started screaming to the point where we couldn't continue. And at that point, and this was like in the middle of Arvit, so I said to everyone, okay, we're just going to sit down. I told them, don't engage, don't get into arguments. Let's sit down and we'll study Torah. Because that's all we can do. So some people left, some people stayed and studied Torah, and I went over to these people. And they said, what are you doing here? And I said, we've been here the last 4 years. Well, didn't you know? I said, no, in fact, I didn't know. You're just doing it to provoke us. I said, no, I'm not. We're doing what we've done the last few years. And they said to him, come sit down, let's talk. And they say, no, we don't want to talk. I said, well, are you open-minded? No, we're not. Go back to where you came from. And we wound up going to a Beit Knesset nearby afterwards, and then the next day we did it indoors at that Beit Knesset. So we did kind of get in the crosshairs of all of these politics.
Wow.
And
I read about it at the time, and it broke my heart to read this story. I wasn't aware that you were actually involved in that.
Obviously, it was very upsetting. And the people themselves, these are new olim, and they're like, what's going on? They're making an issue of us praying in public, and some of them didn't really know the whole backstory, and it was very upsetting.
It sounds like a teachable moment.
Well, I mean, at the moment, it was just kind of like holding on.
Right. In the heat of the moment,
yeah.
sure, it was difficult to work out.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was like fog of war and what on earth are we doing
And
here?
I mean, the teachable moment was a week later, a week and a half later, when there started to be discussions of, well, what would be Simchat Torah? Would there be dancing in the street? Would it be separate? Would there be demonstrators? What was going to happen? And then, horrifically, tragically, and I wrote this a few days after October 7th, I said, we were fighting over prayer in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur, and on Simchat Torah, the next debate was going to come up, and it's almost as if, well, you're fighting over prayer, there's not going to be any prayer, there's not going to be any dancing. The streets were cleared on Simchat Torah. And that message seemed pretty clear that, unfortunately, I saw a pretty direct line between one and the other. And we don't know God's ways, but practically there was no arguing. There was no dancing on Simchat Torah at all.
Wow.
So, and then we, a few days after, we brought a group to the hospital, and everyone kind of retooled. But to the credit, those who were calling for people not to go do their army service flipped around and used their network to help in the war effort, and to open up supply centers and things for the soldiers. And
was that like some sort of a vehicle for reconciliation?
I think so, and it took a while. I know that there was one point where they went to try and do tefillah on Hostage Square and were kind of like pushed out. But then after like 6 to 8 months, there was a Rosh Chodesh a few months ago where they had a tefillah on Hostage, a separate tefillah on Hostage Square for Rosh Chodesh. And we actually had Meirav Berger, the mother of Agam Berger, I think, who's the captive. And some of the captive families have gotten very involved in Torah and very connected to Jewish life and Torah observance. And they kind of, I think, are creating a bridge between that population, which was kind of anti-public religion in Tel Aviv, and the religious community. So I think there have been bridges built. I think there's always going to be a vocal minority who are,
but
their screed is picked up by the media. But I think, as I said before, I think it's much more. There's much more of a range of people having different feelings about these issues, and many more bridges being built. And I am hopeful for the future.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to come up with some judicial reform bill that will have some balance to it. So,
Mietz Hashem. We hope that it can look for a win-win situation, or at least one that, if there's going to have to be some sort of a compromise, if everyone's coming away from feeling like it's not exactly what I wanted, but I can deal with it.
And I think the point of your question before is that yes, the religious community needs to be more aware of, how the other side are feeling. The country's changing, and there's still a significant population who come from the old kind of, labor outlook, and particularly in Tel Aviv. And they can't just feel like they're being stonewalled or bulldozed over. So how do you keep that dialogue open?
Is that because of demographics that are changing?
Yeah, I think so. Demographics, the nature of the country, the shift in power. I mean, it's been happening since Menachem Begin came into power.
Right. Like Labour's been in power I don't know how many times since Menachem Begin took over. It's been very few and far between, and it's looking. I mean, especially like post October 7th, like you've got an entire generation that's been red pilled.
But this population in Tel Aviv feels like, our parents and grandparents founded the country and built it up, and
which is true.
Yeah. But the country's changing, so it's very difficult. How do you keep everyone feeling like they're not
alienated, and
what is
these are big
what
challenges.
is that like? What does it look like to have a? I mean, we all want to have an Israel where. Even if we're not like, we're never going to get rid of the fact that we've got 1,000 different opinions. Sorry, how many people? 10 million different opinions in the country, and some very people feel passionate about Israel. It's not like nobody feels okay, I don't mind. It's like people have very strong feelings about it, because from one side they've invested. Like as you said, the Mapainikim were the ones who really built the country. That was, labor Zionism. They're the kibbutzim at the time of the kibbutzim was the cornerstone of Jewish settlement in Israel. And
I forget which rabbi said, if tens of thousands of Dati people had come to Israel, the country could have been different, but they didn't.
Right.
So
there were Dati people, of course.
There were some, but not the large numbers. So they weren't the ones coming. So, but this is part of the Israeli, different outlook. Is that the Israeli religious community will just kind of say what they think, what they want, without worrying about without thinking about how's it going to impact, people who don't have their outlook.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like each group's kind of staking out their turf and holding on to it.
Right, and that's
it. My outlook is much more building bridges.
Right. And I think that's a big difference between like people like you who are on the ground, who are out there building bridges, and the politicians. Because politicians, unfortunately, have a vested interest in creating friction, because that's how they get votes. They get votes by beating the drums and saying they're coming to get you, they're going to mess you over, they're going to do bad things to you and ruin your lifestyle, and both sides are all four sides, whatever. Everyone's doing it. There's every single political camp has got some boogeyman on the other side who is like the worst thing since whoever, I don't even want to say. Okay, and they're threatening you, and they're going to ruin the country, and they're going to make you impose their lifestyle on you. So they beat the drums. Quick, come out to vote. You must vote for us so that we can protect you from those bad people over there. That's what politicians do.
The polarizing, you mentioned this before, about the polarizing nature. Yeah. But what's interesting is that the young Olim, they're really just trying to get on their feet and just trying to build their lives here.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's an interest in the issues, but I don't see them, some do, but most are not jumping into the politics, as quickly, and it takes a while to really kind of understand the lay of the land. First of all, just the, party system, which is different than the American system, is already difficult to understand how it works. And we'd had speakers come and just try to explain, how does the political system work here? Because that's already very different for a lot of Olim certainly from the United States.
Sure, you're used to having your representative, the one that you voted for,
right,
that you can speak to and say,
for the president, and
But even your district representative, the fact that
too, it's geographical, whereas here it isn't geographical.
You've got this anonymous list. If you voted for Leslie Likud, you've got like one of 40 people on the list, and who did you vote for? I don't know. If I've got a problem, who do I speak to? I don't know. There's nobody to speak to. Once they're in, okay, thank you, bye. Thanks for your vote, bye.
So people are just trying to kind of, get on their feet, build their lives, interested in the issues, but not as. We've had people in the community who did volunteer for, with the war effort in all different ways.
Yeah.
But I think that. Living in Tel Aviv. I mean, Tel Aviv also has a whole range of populations. The Dati population is much larger than it was. Right. The synagogues are filling up again, and it's much more balanced as well. I would say the majority are not, but it's a significant presence. And so this year on Yom Kippur, there was a debate about, would there be outdoors, would there not? First, the Supreme Court ruled there couldn't be. And then 3 days before Yom Kippur, they said it's allowed.
They did?
Yeah. So in Kikar Atarim, they had a very large outdoor service. We actually went we had already planned our whole service indoors. So at the very end, we went to hear a shofar outdoors with the larger service. Right. So, yeah. So
and there weren't like any vigilantes coming out and
no. So
they said it was okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so once again,
I think perhaps people were a little bit stung by October 7 and took the same lesson that you did.
Yeah.
One can hope.
So one hopes that things are going in a more reconciliatory direction. Yeah.
I'm just going to take a quick break over here. Right. So, just again stepping aside back into the political conflict and looking for a positive way forward. What I was saying earlier is that like the political forces that work in on the political level in the Knesset are generally speaking not productive, divisive, and the last thing kind of that we need as a people. And given the fact that we do have a nation that's got so many different opinions, what's the happy path? How do we bring about a grassroots reconciliation between people who disagree vehemently, but can find some modus operandi where we're okay with each other, even though we may disagree?
Well, I think there are some initiatives. There are these salons that had been going on before October 7th, had started actually, which brought together groups from different outlooks, from the left, from the right, religious, non-religious, whatever you want to call it. And there are a number of different organizations doing this. And I think that those are probably the most effective, and that's really the way to do it, is to start, as you said, with grassroots and to try and...
What kind of organizations are there? I don't know these organizations. You're more in touch there.
I'm not in touch, I'm not directly involved, but I know that there are initiatives to do that. So... and I mean, our initiative is more connecting people to Jewish life. So
it's kind of not on the same axis. Right.
Yeah. But I think what we're doing does dispel some of the stereotypes about religious life and about religious Jews.
Yeah.
So in an indirect way, it does.
And perhaps, I mean, perhaps it's the fact that you're not like directly trying to grapple with these issues, but rather dealing with issues that are of common interest, that like everyone needs to know how to deal with the Misrad Panim, with the Interior Ministry, and with how to deal with...
And everyone's worried about the future security of our country, right? You might have different opinions about,
Right, and when you find...
with it, but
and that's honestly how... speaking that out, I mean, it's now obvious now that I'm saying it out, but that's how these differences get de-emphasized by the fact that, like, let's say I'm working in a company in Petach Tikva, and I go into the office, and it's a whole hodgepodge of different people who have, as you can imagine, the full spectrum of political views, and yet we all sit together on an engineering project and do our stuff. And say, okay, so you vote this way, I vote that way, and generally we kind of stick to the rule of, don't bring religion and politics into the workplace. But the fact is, it's obvious. Like when I go into the office, I'm wearing a kippah and tzitzit, and somebody else is not. That we have different views on religion, but we love each other. We're good people. We can deal with each other, and that's probably just by de-emphasizing, by not even getting involved in the religion and politics thing, you realize that, okay, this guy is normal. He's normal. And when it does come down to something where he's got a strong opinion on something, I've worked with him before, I know he's a reasonable guy, I should actually listen to what he's got to say, not just put him in a box and say, oh, extremist.
Because he disagrees with me. Yeah. And I think also, if speaker comes and talks about, the security situation in Syria, or even judicial reform. I think if you're talking around the issues, or we had a lawyer who in the Army who works with, the Army's compliance with international law and how that's monitored. So I think if you discuss around the issues, it becomes less politicized. Oh, are you on this camp or that camp? Let's discuss this issue and see, understand it better, and people come out maybe with different solutions of how to deal with it. But but I think you can kind of have a common dialogue around understanding the issues. So that's what we try to do. Yeah.
So, tell me some of your best war stories. What kind of experiences have you had in your outreach and your work with Tribe TLV that have been interesting, have been challenging, have opened your eyes to different things?
So I think that Jewish identity is one of them, where people, they come to Israel, and sometimes there's a question about their Jewish identity, their background. If they think that their grandparent, their grandmother wore a chai and knew some Yiddish words. So this comes up a lot, which it did in the States as well, as clarifying Jewish identity. And some people find out that, according to the halacha, they're not Jewish, and they need to start, they realize that if they need to do a conversion.
If they want to,
If they want to, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of students who study with who are exploring it, but I think when coming to Israel makes it more compelling for them as well, because they're here and now, it's a Jewish state, and it's, and they want to, their children to be able to marry, and through the Rabbanut, and so that those kind of issues come up, I think, a little more. I think Israeli olim dating is an interesting phenomenon, which happens a lot, and people do get married, and certainly a quicker way to integrate into Israel is if you marry someone
Israeli spouse
who's native Israeli. We're Israeli too, but native Israeli, that. But there are differences too, and I've seen relationships not work out just because culturally they're so different. I think how Israelis and chutzniks argue and disagree, and Israelis will be get all worked up, heated up, and yell at each other, and then 2 minutes later everything's fine. And, and so I was like, oh, what's going on? So that can cause a lot of difficulties. So the cultural differences, I think, I see that sometimes being a challenge, and those are some of the things that.
What's your advice to people outside of Israel who are thinking of coming?
So I do know people who, they meet someone, what are you doing living there? Why aren't you here? And I generally don't have that outlook, because I think that, people come, make Aliyah for a lot of different reasons. I think Europeans are more aware that the future of Jewish life is here and it's not in Europe. So they tend to not question as much and feel like, well, should I go back? But certainly people from the States, my outlook is that someone really has to want it and has to make a commitment to it, because I do see people going back. And so I think that I don't push people. I encourage them, and I try to get them to think about it and be open to it. But I think that a person really has to kind of make that commitment, and it has to be a commitment to that one views that this is the larger destiny of the Jewish people, and I want to be here because it's part of the future, greater future of our people. And if you're just, let me compare my lifestyle here to there, quality of life, there has to be another factor in the
Israel's
equation.
not a place that you come to for the Gashmias. I think that, that was one of my observations when I first made Aliyah. I had, a very stereotypical picture of Americans. Because I'd been to America before, and I had a certain view of the physicality, the Gashmios.
What a man cave would look like in America.
Yeah, and you've got to be driving the best car. You've got to have the top.
You'd have the full wall, a flat screen to watch your games
all
on.
that stuff, and I wasn't very impressed, and I'd also, I'd met Americans when I spent a little bit of time, a few weeks in yeshiva in Israel when I was on my Baal Tshuva thing. I was in Osamer, and there was a group of Americans who came through, and I was like really unimpressed with them in terms of just where their minds were at, where they were holding personally, and in terms of sensitivity and spirituality. They were okay. But then I made Aliyah, and I met obviously in this neighborhood predominantly Americans, and they were such great people, like really top people, and I figured it was because what I just said. You don't make Aliyah because of the good life over here. You make Aliyah because this is where you want to be. This is a special place, and for especially at the time that we were making Aliyah, 2002, it was in the middle of the second Intifada.
Wow.
Rahman al-Litzlan, buses blowing up every Monday and Thursday. It was a frightening time.
Wow.
And people were making Aliyah. Then we came at the same time as the first Nefesh B'Nefesh flight. And these were people who were coming out of the most comfortable America. Okay, it was post 9/11, so there was a lot of the boat was rocking there as well. But still, coming out of these big houses and whatever, and moving into little apartments in Israel, and giving up a heck of a lot of wealthy lifestyle to live in this place. You got to be a pretty special person to make that call and say it's not about the money, it's not about the comfort, it's about purpose, and that. Overwhelmingly was what I found over here, is that the people who chose to be here were people who made Aliyah by choice, not because they were driven out of Russia. Actually, when we were making our own decision to make Aliyah from South Africa, it started out with our immigration questions started out when I was carjacked, when my first daughter was 1 day old, and I don't want to go through the whole thing right now, but it was a massively traumatizing event. I realized I could have just missed out on being a father. My daughter could have missed out on having a father, and within 6 weeks we were making a pilot trip to Israel to see could we do it, and it was terrible timing, and it was a terrible motivation, because we were looking to get out of South Africa, and we're thinking, will Israel be good enough for us? And at the time we were not even thinking, we didn't realize it at the time, but I was like massively PTSD. And my wife was also, aside from PTSD, was also having a bit of postpartum depression. So we were like looking at Israel not through rose-tinted spectacles, but through grey-tinted spectacles. And we looked at this and like, how people live here? How can you do it? We can't. We just can't. It's just. And I think at the time it was actually the right decision not to come, because we would have been running away, and. I just don't think you can really make a successful Aliyah if you're running away from somewhere.
And how long after?
How long after did we actually make the decision? It was a couple of years later. We were after we decided that we couldn't make it in Israel. We took a look at. I think we kind of took a look at the UK just because my brother was there. And again, it was a possibility, But then we also thought, like, can we stay in South Africa? We were thinking maybe we can get by. We got past all the PTSD and thought, okay, maybe we should buy property now because we're earning a little bit more. And there was one night when there was one property that we were like almost about to close on, and we drove past the outside of the property one night just to see it again before we made our final offer. And we looked down this dark driveway at the dark garden and the house with a few lights on, and my wife said, I can't live here. I'd be scared every night. Mm-hmm. And we took that away and discussed it and said, you know something, if we just cannot if we cannot live in South Africa, then we've got to find somewhere else, because okay, again, we're still in the sort of running away thing, but it's like, again, taking perspective, like, we just aren't going to cope over here, so we do have to find somewhere better. And then we're looking at Australia. My sister-in-law was in Australia at the time, and while we were in Australia, you know, things were just dropping into place. I got a job offer with relocation, and you know, after a week we were already set up and say, yeah, for sure we're coming. And then, like, after 2 weeks of being in Australia, we started feeling like, okay, but where's the tachlis here? Where's the what are we doing this for? What's the positive of Australia? I mean, Melbourne is beautiful. Have you been to Melbourne? Beautiful city, love it. It's like, and like every time we met somebody say, you know that Melbourne's been voted the best city to live in the world for 3 years running? And it's like every single person, like, hi, how do you do? You know that Melbourne's been the best? It's like everyone's pushing Melbourne, and I can't argue with it. For Olam Hazeh, for this world, Melbourne is fabulous. It's a great place. But you know, looking at the headlines in the newspaper and looking and saying, you know, it was something about uproar because a new highway was going to go through a wombat reserve or something like that, and so, like, really? This is the headline? And you know, I think while we were in Australia, that was where we realized that actually our first pilot trip to Israel was very poorly timed and under very bad circumstances. And if we're actually looking for a tachlis, if we're looking for something to build, to look forward to, then we got to go back to Israel and see that. And that was a very long-winded way of saying that.
So that's what we're saying, that you know, you have to want to come for a larger purpose, for a larger destiny. See that this is the future of the Jewish people, this is where I want my children, grandchildren to be building, and that you're building towards something that is going to be nitzachit, right? That's going to be...
It's an eternal thing, and this is where it's at. This is where it's at for the Jewish people. And like you, I'm also not you know, a aliyah, everyone get on the plane now, come now, otherwise you're losers. I really am not that way inclined. It's got to be something where you're ready for it. And there are very valid reasons not to come to Israel. If you're not going to make a living, I'm not saying you shouldn't try, but if you cannot make a living in Israel, then you have no choice but to go somewhere where you can make a living. And there are people who are doing outstanding work in Chutz La'aretz. I've got especially rabbis. I have to say I've got lots of friends who were with me in yeshiva who have rabbinic positions and who are doing amazing work in their communities, and they are needed. And honestly, they should be the ones to turn the lights out once the whole community has come to Israel, because as long as there's still a community in Chutz La'aretz, you need leaders who are going to give that guidance, give the services to the people who are still there.
So we felt after 17 years we'd done our time there. And, there was no time to come do it here. So, But that's what we're saying, that it's not easy always, and you know, there's big adjustments, so a person has to really want it. So one thing we've done is we're starting to move towards doing more business networking events and helping people professionally. because once again,
Right.
you don't, like you're saying, if you don't have the job, then
It's not so easy to get by without
then your
that.
aliyah is not going to work.
Yeah.
So once a month we do a business forum event where we have speakers come, sometimes from HR, how to position yourself, sometimes founders who talk about what they're looking for in their teams, and so people can kind of like think about that, and that's a vital part of it.
Yeah, that's that kind of network of friends is like so crucial. I mean, do you find that people sort of graduate from your organization, or like they've been here for 3-4 years and they say, I'm okay on my own, and you don't see them again? Or
I mean,
do
I think you have both. I
alternatives?
think people, as they're here longer, they get more integrated into native Israeli society. Their Hebrew gets better, but they still. We've had people come who they tell, I made Aliyah 10 years ago, and they still like to have that touch point of an Ole community that they know is there, that they connect to. So I don't think. Different people in different ways, and I've met people who came here, went into the army, and really just fully immersed themselves in Israeli society.
Right.
So
the reason why I'm asking that is because it just struck me the value that we have, say, in our community over here is the community. Like, okay, so we are predominantly a family-oriented community. You have couples and children, and it's a very different dynamic from your singles crowd that you have in Tel Aviv. And I just remember, when we first made Aliyah, having that network of other people was so vital for us. I mean, the Ulpan that we went to was valuable to us not because we learned Hebrew. I mean, we barely learned any. I mean, I learned a bit of Hebrew over there and got a bit of conversational practice, but the networking was the biggest thing. That's my wife got her first job through somebody that she met in Ulpan, and I got my first job through not through somebody, but because somebody else told me that there was a job going, and I applied for it and joined, and the people that we met then have turned out to be lifelong friends, and that helps to anchor us. The fact that we have community and that we're very involved in community. Now, that's why I'm asking about Tribe Tel Aviv.
So I'm saying I think even people who've been here a long time like to connect to the Ole community. There's familiarity, and then there's
because it's important for somebody who's arriving today that there's somebody who's in that circle who's been around 10 years and can
that too.
Yeah.
So it helps both ways.
Share that experience. Yeah, that's been a very interesting discussion. You have any parting thoughts about what you'd like to see and how you see Tribe Tel Aviv going forward and the future for Israel?
Well, I mentioned several times that I'm very optimistic about Israel. I think that as Jews we focus on the problems and analyze them, and they have to be dealt with and looked at. But I think if you step back and you look at the larger picture, I think it's miraculous that you have young people who are just get inspired to come and move here and make their future here and contribute to the future of the state of Israel. That's an amazing thing. Just that alone. And there are thousands coming every year now compared to the millions of Jews outside of Israel. It's a small number in the bucket, but I think we said also that it's a self-selecting group. So it's really the people who are really committed and driven and idealistic who are the ones who are going to come. And maybe that's also the way it's supposed to be. But and the challenges are there, and there are some people who go back, but the large majority stay and wind up contributing to the future of the state of Israel. And we've always had that. There's always been new blood coming in, and I think it's only going to grow. The numbers are up. They're not up staggeringly high, but there's a
and that's the amazing thing that post October 7th, the numbers are still going up, and even when something like that happens, it almost makes people want to be here more, which is an amazing thing about the Jewish people. You run towards the danger. It's amazing. And as you say, the future is bright, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll see an even better future.
And so we hope to be continuing to help New Orleans to connect, to make it here, and to contribute to the future of the state.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much for your time. Okay.
Hako, Sababa, where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin.